We still have with us in the studio Mr. Paul Arkwright, who's the British High Commissioner to Nigeria, and Mr. Sulaiman Arigbabu, who is the Southwest Coordinator of the Transition Monitoring Group. Just before we went on break, I was going to ask you about vote buying. Initially, it wasn't really the concern. I mean, even though we had noticed, it beginning to spring up its head and seemed to be getting worse from what we had witnessed in Anambra and maybe in previous elections before now. For a number of people, for a number of civil society organizations, they were not really focusing on that. Would you say that it is getting worse? And why do you think it's getting worse?
Of course it is getting worse. Each new elections that we've done, the politicians appear to be more brazen. Yes, we could say that is because INEC is improving on its process. So the other avenues for rigging the elections are actually closing up. So the new thing is to induce voters. And of course, that also should tell voters that means that the power truly resides in you. It's just the value you place on it. So we need a lot more voter education. But we insist that the reason why this is done is because there's impunity in the land. It was as bad as people who have not getting their remuneration for quite some months were getting a lot. Days to the election. Day to the election. On election day, we had reports of people paying as much as 5,000 and to some other amounts in places. And this thing wasn't, yes, we didn't come up with somebody that we could, we did see on our way to IKEA, for instance, we saw one of your colleagues was having an altercation with the security agency because he actually saw that things were exchanged, things weren't going well. That seemed to be vote by, and he called on the security agencies to intervene. And rather than intervening, they turned on the guy, and we had to stop on our way to. Yeah, we had to stop to intervene, and as a matter of fact, by that time his phone had been seized, but it was resolved, and they gave him his stuff back.
Would you say then that the security agencies were aware, but maybe they were abetting the situation? From
our observation from the people we deployed on field, from some of the things we saw where we went, the security agencies largely stayed back from. You don't need to be called to come and arrest a situation as a law enforcement officer if you see a crime being committed, but they kind of stayed back. So they didn't act as one would have expected. And that's why I'm saying that we need this to be investigated, but if we are going to rely on the same people that were deployed, it could be because they will be a bit complicit. That's for a fact. And the reason this will keep going on is if nobody is held to account.
What I find more disturbing is how brazen it's become. Yes. In the past, it used to be that people would tell voters, oh, if they come trying to bribe you, accept the bribe, but still go and vote your conscience. After all, you still have the secrecy of the ballot. But now we understand that, even the political parties seem to be getting more sophisticated. They have ways of ensuring that their observers are able to actually see the party you voted for, or even the voters are asked to take pictures of their voter slip, of the ballot paper, and then come and show them to say who they actually voted for. Is this really something that we can stop?
Yeah, because we did see that in quite a number of places. You will see the citer. The arrangement of the polling units is such that the citer can be somewhere that he sees where the person has voted. And of course, most often because the voter is also complicit, they make a show of, their ballot. These are things we can stop because all you need to do is to increase the level of secrecy that the voter enjoys during the process of voting. That is one. Rather than deploying so many human beings that could be compromised as security, we can also deploy technology such that if we have evidence of some of these things happening, then we can then hold people to account. And when people know that they are going to be held to account, then we are likely to overcome this problem faster than we imagine.
High Commissioner, there's so much focus placed on the back end at the conclusion of the process. How can we now kind of, give medicine after death, as it were? I want to focus on the front end. When you talk about campaign finance and evolving those structures for how parties will raise their funds, how parties will spend their funds, we know in Nigeria we're still at a point where we are injecting state resources directly into parties. What are your thoughts on how this vote buying can potentially be curbed, if possible, by the front end, making sure that there are you know, there's adequate oversight, etc., from agencies like the EFCC?
Well, clearly there are rules, there's legislation, there are laws which need to be respected when it comes to campaign finance. If those rules, if those laws are being broken, then it's important that they're investigated. I agree, the signal that it would send to prosecute people who are responsible for vote buying is a very strong one. And certainly the police, the security agencies have a responsibility on the day itself, as well as before, to ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. So I think there are some lessons to be learned from Ekiti. I think there are some clear examples of where vote buying and voter inducement went on. That has to be stamped out. I think it will take some time, but there are a number of things that can be done. Certainly, there should be no impunity for people who are responsible for that. Certainly, the laws should be enforced rigorously. Certainly, campaign finance needs to be looked at. Some of the things around party agents who I saw, not many, but a few, just too close to the ballot boxes. You know, we pointed this kind of thing out. There's a perimeter wire, there's a string around the area where the ballot box should be sitting alone, isolated, nobody around it. There were occasions when we saw party agents standing right over the ballot box so they could see very clearly how people were voting. So improvements along that involves training, it involves voter awareness, very important on voter awareness, education. The British government is funding quite a few of these voter awareness programs, especially for women, for youth, for people with disabilities, and just observing and making sure that the rules are kept. That's a fundamental part of this.